like the Wally Barron corruption, that took 15 years for it all to come out in trials and exposés and lawsuits. And
well, the Gazette was pretty important in exposing that story, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Gazette basically triggered the Wally Barron. We had a super writer named Tom Stafford, and he discovered that Wally Barron's law partner, Governor Barron, for you young people who don't know all this, Governor Barron's law partner had set up a bunch of little corporations down in Florida and Georgia and around the South, and nobody knew what they were. And Tommy Stafford went down there and looked, and they were nothing but a post office box. That was all they were, basically, or maybe one secretary who received mail and put checks in the bank. Well, the feds picked up on this immediately, and they began an FBI investigation, and it turned out what those checks were bribes being paid to the Barron administration, and they had put together a whole network of bribe paying that anyone who wanted state contracts and state business had to send checks to these phony corporations, and then they would rig the bids to give them the business. And the Gazette started this, and we covered it and covered it and covered it, and there would be indictments, and they would fizzle out, and there'd be more indictments, and they'd be found innocent, and there'd be more indictments, and it went on and on for year after year in many different facets, until finally they all went to prison, every single one of them. The governor and his highways chief and his administration chief and his state treasurer, everybody, the motor vehicles commissioner. There was one highways equipment supervisor who stole something like 7 heavy trucks and 1,000 typewriters and miles of everything. He stole an entire farm full of government equipment. But those were kind of the wild scandal days. Then the Archmore scandals were different. They were not a network well organized like Wally Barron. Arch's corruption was all personal, just done by himself in the shadows, taking bags of money and hiding behind the city incinerator with bribe payers. And so all those chapters are in the book. Just every strange, exotic case of West Virginia history is in there.
Well, you were one of the first reporters to actually deal with the snake handling churches that have since become a more documented thing.
Yeah, back in the 60s, I believe it was, people would say there's snake handlers out in the mountains, and people would say, nah, no, you're talking about the 1920s. They don't still exist anymore. And then someone phoned me or something and said, no, they're still handling rattlesnakes up at Gauley Bridge and up in Scrabble Creek behind Gauley Bridge. So I got on the phone and I found the leader of that church, and he was a very nice, gentle man, and said, oh, Mr. Haught, be sure to come up and visit us and bring your camera and take our pictures.
So you did.
So I drove up to Gauley Bridge and went to this little church, kind of like over a garage or something, and up in Scrabble Creek, and they brought out the big rattlesnakes, and all of them picked them up, and they speak in the unknown tongue and sing wild, strong music. And they're all really nice people. And once I found the snake handlers and took all the pictures and put them in the paper, that started a kind of a wave of interest, and different television stations would send camera crews there. And a sociologist over at UC, Dr. Nathan Gerard, began to study them as a phenomenon, a cultural situation. And I remember he gave a psychological test to all the members of the Snake Handler Church, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, I think it's called. And then for a control group, he also gave it to a Methodist church up in Montgomery. But the snake handlers came out mentally healthier
than the Methodists,
than the mainline church people. So,
well,
and Dr. Gerard didn't want me to print that, but he revealed it in a scholarly journal somewhere once, and that was the cat was out of the bag.
It's fair game then, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, you worked for some pretty legendary. And with some pretty legendary figures at the Gazette. I guess Ned Chilton is one that everybody knows. You got to tell us a little bit about what that was like.
Right. There's a whole chapter on Ned Chilton, who was a crusader who just wouldn't stop. He really believed in saving the world, you know, and in making West Virginia honest and clean government. And he never learned his lesson.
I guess not.
but he really produced a lot of reforms in West Virginia, and he would get on a kick, and he would not let go of it. And he wanted to combine all the emergency calling in this valley into one 911 center, because in the old days, if you wake up in the middle of the night and your house is on fire, you got to look up the fire department with 7 digits in the dark with no glasses on, and try to dial 7 digits with the smoke rolling in your door. And he realized that if you could just grab the phone and punch 911, the emergency crews could get there so much better. And so he started advocating that in the Gazette. Let's create a 911 emergency center. And none of the local governments, they all were doing their own little fiefdom, each one with their political jobs, and they didn't want to cooperate with each other. But Ned just beat them over the head day after day and month after month, until finally he browbeat them into creating a 911 center. And so today it's got his name on it out at Corridor G.